I was torn between two worlds, my wife, my family, and Toni, the woman who became my anima, my shadow. I couldn't stop, even though I knew it would change everything.
But before we get to that story, let's meet the man behind the mind, the real Carl Jung. Carl, let's start simple. Tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Keswold, a small village on the shores of Lake Constance in Switzerland, in the year 1875. My father was a pastor, a man of scripture, tradition, and quiet disappointment. My mother, well, we'll come back to her. I spent much of my childhood alone, wandering the woods, playing in the shadows of trees. Other children's games didn't interest me. I preferred to sit quietly and watch ants build their tunnels or stare at the sky, imagining shapes in the clouds.
Having read some of your work, that description of your childhood makes complete sense to me. And did you ever get married? Do you have any kids?
Yes, I married Emma. We met when I was still a young man, studying medicine. She came from a wealthy family, sharp, kind, steady. We had 5 children together. Emma was the anchor. She kept one foot on the ground while I wandered the heavens and the underworld.
Well, she sounds lovely. Now, you said we'd come back to your mother.
Yes, she had an affinity for the unseen. People called her odd. I didn't think she was odd. I thought she was profound. She would speak to spirits. At least that's what she said. And when my father was away, I'd sometimes hear her whispering into empty rooms. It frightened me at first, but more than anything, it fascinated me.
Even as a child? Did your family notice?
My father worried. He wanted me to become a man of reason, a man of the cloth. My mother, she understood. She told me stories of spirits and dreams, of the thin veil between this world and the next.
I don't mean to skip ahead here, but your mother's mysticism, do you think it planted the seeds for your later work?
I believe so. She embodied the anima for me, the feminine force, the keeper of mystery. My father represented the logos, the structured, rational mind. I was trapped between these two forces, always trying to reconcile them within myself, like having 2 souls inside me. There were moments when I felt split, as if one part of me longed for the stability of reason, and the other was drawn to the chaos of dreams.
What do you mean when you say you were drawn to the chaos of dreams?
There were days when I felt I didn't belong in the waking world. I would wake from dreams that lingered with me all day. Visions of towers, strange figures, symbols I couldn't explain. One dream in particular haunted me. A figure rising from a golden throne, vast and powerful. It both terrified me and filled me with wonder. Later on, I began to realize that these dreams were speaking a language older than words, a language of the soul.
And as a child, did you share these dreams with anyone?
Only my mother. She would listen, nodding as if she understood, though she rarely spoke of her own visions. I later learned that she too had her own encounters with the unknown, whispers and presences that others could not see. It was a lonely childhood, but it gave me the space to observe, to listen, to wonder. Even then, I felt there was a world beneath the world we know, a world waiting to be discovered.
Now, Carl, let's shift to the next chapter of your life. You went on to study medicine and eventually turned to psychology. What drew you to the mind?
I was captivated by the mysteries of the psyche. In my early work at the Bergholzli Clinic in Zurich, I encountered patients who seemed trapped in invisible prisons, lost in a world of hallucinations and fears. I couldn't stop wondering what was behind their suffering. I felt an almost magnetic pull to understand the unseen forces driving their pain. What fascinated me most was that some patients spoke in symbols, dreamlike fragments, images of gods and monsters, even archetypes, long before I had a name for them. I realized that what they were experiencing was not just madness, but a kind of spiritual crisis, a confrontation with their own unconscious.
That sounds like a radically different way of understanding mental illness. Not just a disease, but a subconscious experience.
It was. And not everyone agreed with me. But we'll come to that.
So was it during your study of mental illness that you encountered Freud?
Yes, I read his interpretation of dreams and felt like I'd found a guide. When we finally met in 1907, it was as if I had reunited with a long-lost father, one who happened to be deeply interested in all the things that captivated my own mind. Kindred spirits we were. We talked for hours, 13 consecutive hours once, about dreams, symbols, and the depths of the unconscious. It was exhilarating. I admired his brilliance, his courage to break taboos. But even then, I felt a subtle difference in our perspectives. Freud was fascinated by sexuality. He saw it as the root of all human drives. I was intrigued, but I also sensed something broader, something deeper.
And what was it? What was that deeper something you were sensing?
I noticed that many of my patients' fantasies and dreams echoed ancient myths, stories of gods, heroes, and shadows. It wasn't just about desire or repression. I saw it more as a shared symbolic language, a collective unconscious that connected all of us across cultures and time.
Can you give us an example of these patients that demonstrated this to you? That there was something deeper to their behavior?
Yes. There was a young man at Bergholzli who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. He believed the sun had a special connection to him, that it sent him messages through rays of light. To many, it was delusion. But when I listened closely, I realized he was describing an ancient solar myth, almost identical to stories found in Egyptian and Mithraic traditions. He had no education in mythology, no exposure to those texts, and yet, there it was, clear symbolic structure, ancient archetypes rising from his unconscious. I began to suspect that these were not just random hallucinations. They were expressions of something universal.
So what others dismissed as madness, you saw as expression, as meaning.
Exactly. That's when it struck me. The psyche doesn't invent, it remembers. The mind isn't a blank slate, but a wellspring of inherited symbols and forgotten truths. That moment changed everything for me.
Fascinating. And so, I understand your relationship with Freud didn't last. What happened?
In the beginning, we were aligned, but over time, I realized Freud was fixated on one aspect of the psyche, sexuality. He saw the unconscious as a reservoir of repressed desires. In Freud's world, everything boiled down to sex, potty training, unconscious affections towards one's mother or father, even the way a man organized his bookshelf might signal repression. It all felt so narrow, so clinical. I sensed something far older and deeper. Myths, dreams, the language of the soul. But Freud refused to follow me into that symbolic realm. Freud feared what he called the black tide of the occult. He rejected my belief that the psyche connects us to something beyond ourselves, something spiritual, sacred. He wanted to keep psychology rooted in science, in measurable facts. I respected his caution, but for me, it was too limiting.
That sounds like a fundamental divide.
It was. Over time, our correspondence became strained. I knew our paths had to diverge, but it wasn't easy. For me, Freud wasn't just a colleague. He was a father figure, a mentor. Breaking away from him felt like tearing apart a piece of myself. It was like losing a father.
After your break with Freud, where did that leave you?
Alone. I resigned from my academic posts. The invitations stopped, the conversations faded. For the first time, I wasn't just isolated socially. I was untethered spiritually. I began to experience what I can only call a descent. Waking visions, strange symbols, floods of red sweeping across Europe. A voice that would whisper warnings and riddles from the depths of my own mind.
Did you believe you were losing your mind?
Yes. At times, I thought madness had finally come for me, but another part of me understood. These images were not trying to destroy me. They were trying to speak. I began to write, to draw, to speak with the figures who appeared to me. One of them was Philemon, a wise otherworldly man with the wings of a kingfisher and the voice of a prophet. He wasn't a hallucination. He was a part of me I had never met before.
You treated these visions as if they were real?
They were real, psychologically real. I listened to them, learned from them. I recorded everything in a series of journals, what would later become the Red Book. That period, those years of chaos, taught me the most important lesson of my life. Healing does not come from ignoring the unconscious. It comes from descending into it, fully, deliberately.
Most people spend their lives trying to avoid that descent.
Yes. And in doing so, they remain strangers to themselves. But I had no choice. I had opened a door that could not be closed. What others called a breakdown, I came to see as a breakthrough.
So after years in isolation, visions, journals, drawings, what did it all lead to, Carl? What came out of that descent?
A realization that I was not the only one seeing these images. The figures that visited me, the wise old man, the shadow, the child, the great mother, they weren't inventions of my personal mind. They were timeless. I began to call them archetypes, primordial patterns embedded in the psyche. They appear in myths, fairy tales, dreams, in the stories of tribes that had never contacted one another.
You believed these symbols weren't just personal, they were universal.
Exactly. I called it the collective unconscious, a layer of the mind deeper than the personal unconscious. It contains the entire psychic history of mankind. This is why a schizophrenic man in Zurich could describe solar deities with no knowledge of ancient mythology, why a child's nightmare might echo the Battle of Ragnarok, why artists, poets, and mystics across centuries all seem to pull from the same well.
So the unconscious isn't just a garbage bin of suppressed memories.
No, it is a treasury, a symbolic reservoir that links us to all who came before. And it's not merely backward-looking. It speaks to who we might become. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to face those symbols, to integrate them, to meet the shadow, to learn from the anima and animus, to recognize the self not just as ego, but as the totality of who we are.
And all of that began with the Red Book?
The Red Book was the seed. Everything else grew from it.
Carl, a moment ago you mentioned the shadow. What exactly is it?
The shadow is everything we refuse to see in ourselves. Every impulse we deny, every envy, cruelty, lust, rage, we banish it into the unconscious, but it doesn't disappear. It waits. It appears in our dreams as monsters, in our projections as enemies. We see in others what we most fear in ourselves.
Can you give us an example of this? Maybe in one of your patients?
Yes. There was a man who came to me during the war years. A respected lawyer, brilliant, rational, controlled. But he was plagued by violent dreams, grotesque figures, mutilation, shadows whispering behind doors. He told no one. He feared he was going mad. I asked him to draw them, to face them, and what emerged was his own shadow, his need to dominate, to punish, to humiliate. He'd buried it so deeply that it had begun to erupt in his sleep and in his waking life through subtle cruelty.
But those impulses to dominate, to punish, to humiliate, that doesn't seem like behavior we'd want to lean into.
Not lean into, rather understand. When left in the dark, those impulses twist us, but when brought to light, they lose their grip. You don't act them out, you own them. You learn where they come from, what they want, and how to not be ruled by them. To confront the shadow is not to embrace cruelty, it is to disarm it.
So you're saying to listen to these impulses until we understand what parts of ourselves we're repressing, the sides of ourselves we fear becoming?
Exactly. The shadow isn't evil, it is simply us, undigested, unintegrated. The shadow contains not only our darkness, but our power, creativity, sexual energy, will, fire.
But it seems like you're implying that we should somehow explore these darker sides of ourselves and somehow integrate them into who we are, no?
Yes, that is the essence of individuation. To live in harmony with your whole self, not just the polished, acceptable parts, but the forgotten, feared, and rejected ones as well.
But how do you integrate your shadow without going too far? How do we integrate our more aggressive impulses without hurting others in the process?
That is the tightrope. Integration is not indulgence. You do not act out the shadow. You recognize it. You learn its voice, its rhythm, and then you give it a place in your psyche, not in your behavior. It's like taming a wolf. You don't lock it away and pretend it's not there, but you also don't let it run your life.
Carl, earlier you mentioned the anima. Can you explain what that is?
The anima is the inner feminine in a man. She is not a fantasy, not merely a projection onto women, but a vital part of the male psyche. She appears in dreams, in art, in moods that come unbidden. And if she is rejected, she distorts.
And does the same apply to women?
Yes. In women, the counterpart is the animus, the inner masculine. He can appear as a voice of judgment or a figure of strength. Both the anima and animus act as bridges to the unconscious, but when ignored, they act out. The anima becomes moodiness, seduction, emotional chaos. The animus becomes opinionatedness, stubborn logic, cold certainty.
That's interesting. So, in our modern world, it feels like gender roles and ideas of masculinity and femininity are distorted or something. And sometimes it feels like men and women are at war with each other these days. Could understanding the anima and animus help us heal these cultural tensions?
Yes. Because what we reject in ourselves, we attack in others. When a man disowns his inner feminine, he may fear emotion or mock it in others. When a woman represses her inner masculine, she may distrust her own authority and then resent it when she sees it outside herself. But when we integrate these figures, we meet the other not as an enemy, but as a mirror.
So the journey isn't just about understanding the opposite sex, it's about finding the parts of them within us?
Exactly. We do not become whole by rejecting the other. We become whole by discovering that the other has been inside us all along.
Let's talk about dreams. They play such a large role in your work. How do you define them exactly?
Dreams are the psyche's natural language, not of logic, but of image. The unconscious does not speak in sentences, it speaks in symbols, and in those symbols, it tells us what the ego does not want to hear.
So when we dream of falling or being chased or losing our teeth, what's actually going on?
Well, those are not signs to be decoded like a cipher. They are living symbols. To dream of falling may mean something different to each dreamer. The key is not in the event, but in the emotion. How did it feel? Where were you? Who or what was there?
So there's no universal dream dictionary?
No. There are archetypal patterns, yes, but their expression is personal. You must treat each dream like a poem written in your own language, and ask, why is the unconscious showing me this? What part of myself is trying to speak?
But can we really decipher dreams reliably? How would you go about deriving meaning from a dream with one of your patients?
Very gently, not with answers, but with questions. I would ask them to retell the dream slowly, as if it were happening now. Then we would explore. What did the figures feel like? What part of you might they represent? What emotions did they carry that you avoid in waking life?
So, this sounds a little subjective, no? I can see why the psychological community of your time might have resisted exploring something so abstract. Did exploring these dreams with your clients really yield that much success?
More than most expected. Because when a person feels truly seen, not by me, but by their own unconscious, something shifts. A new energy emerges. A pattern becomes clear.
I guess I can see how exploring the feeling and darker parts of the dream could reveal our fears, but it just seems so difficult to pin down. I barely remember my dreams half the time.
It may sound imprecise, but it works. Because dreams bypass the ego. They show you not who you pretend to be, but who you are. Your fears, your longings, your unlived life. And when a patient finally sees the deeper meaning, not as a metaphor, but as message, something unlocks. They stop fighting themselves, and they begin to change, not by force, but by recognition.
Carl, so much of your work comes back to this idea of myth. But aren't myths just stories?
No. They are how the psyche speaks. Myths are not entertainment. They are maps, drawn by the soul.
Maps of what?
Of how to live, how to suffer, how to grow, how to die. They contain the great patterns of human life, the hero's journey, the fall, the rebirth. When we lose myth, we lose guidance.
So you're saying people today suffer because they've lost their understanding of these universal patterns?
Yes, many modern people no longer feel part of anything greater. They chase pleasure or success or certainty, but underneath, they are adrift. What they lack is meaning. And meaning cannot be manufactured. It must be discovered, often through symbol, through struggle, through story.
So, if I'm adrift, how can I use my understanding of these patterns to find my way again?
Begin by asking, what story am I in? Am I in the underworld, the trial, the return? Myths give shape to chaos. When you recognize the pattern, you stop feeling cursed and start feeling called. You realize your suffering has a direction. It's not random. It is part of the journey.
So the remedy is to figure out where we are in our journey.
Yes. Every myth begins with a descent into darkness, into confusion. But that descent is essential. You must become the author of your story. To ask, what chapter am I in, is to begin reclaiming your role. And along the way, you don't simply survive the story. You discover who you truly are, not the person you thought you were, but the person you were meant to become.
There's a quote of yours that fits here, actually. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Carl, I have to ask, what do you think of Jordan Peterson?
Yes. I've heard his name echoed often in the modern world. He's done something quite rare. He's taken psychology seriously, morally, culturally, spiritually. And in doing so, he's reached people who might otherwise never touch a book on the unconscious. I respect his willingness to wade into difficult waters, to speak of responsibility, of myth, of meaning. These are crucial themes, but I must also say, when a man stands on a platform, any platform, he risks becoming a symbol himself. Someone will see him as a guide, others as a threat. This is not a reflection of the man alone, but the projections he stirs in others.
Do you think he's misunderstood your work?
I think he interprets it through the lens of his time, just as I spoke through the lens of mine. He emphasizes order, discipline, hierarchy. These are parts of the psyche, yes, but not the whole. What matters most is whether he helps people confront their shadow, whether he helps them dream again, If he does that, truly, then I am grateful.
Carl, we've talked about Freud, dreams, myths, but there's one part of your life that many still wonder about. Toni Wolff. Who was she?
Toni was once my patient. She had a sharp intellect and a deep intuition for the symbolic. After her treatment, she stayed on, first informally, then as a true collaborator. We studied dreams together, mapped archetypes, explored the structure of the psyche before the theories had name. She helped give shape to ideas the world would one day call Jungian. Over time, that bond deepened. She was not just a colleague. She became my anima, my inner feminine, and eventually my lover.
You were already married to Emma.
Yes. Emma was my foundation. Loyal, wise, endlessly strong. We had 5 children together. She carried the weight of our family while I wandered far and deep into the psyche, into symbols, into things most people never touch. But with Toni, it was something different. Not of the body, but of the soul. I was torn between 2 worlds, my wife, my family, and Toni, the woman who became my anima, my shadow. I couldn't stop, even though I knew it would change everything.
Did it?
Yes, it caused pain. Emma once said there were 3 of us in the marriage, and she was right. It was a long, difficult tension, never fully resolved, but it forced me to confront the truth that love is not neat, not moral, not safe. It is alchemical.
What do you mean by that?
Love transforms us and burns us. Toni revealed parts of myself I had long suppressed. She wasn't just a partner, she was my mirror.
I have to ask, Carl, do you encourage your clients to pursue potential affairs as a means of exploring themselves, their shadow? Personally, this isn't morally acceptable to me.
No. I do not recommend betrayal. Harming others is not a prerequisite for growth. But we must be honest about what drives us, what seduces us. If we deny the shadow, it finds its own way out. I didn't set out to hurt anyone, but in the end, I did. And I have carried that weight my entire life. Yet I learned this. To love truly, you must know yourself. And I had not fully known myself until I loved them both.
So, we've come a long way. You've spoken of dreams, myth, love, fear. But now I want to ask about the end. What are your thoughts on death?
Death is not the opposite of life. It is its completion. Just as day fades into night, so too must the conscious return to the unconscious. I never saw death as an end, but as a return, a homecoming.
Do you believe in an afterlife?
I believe something continues, not the ego, not the personality we wear like a costume, but the deeper self, the soul. What we glimpse in dreams and symbols, that, I believe, returns to the source. Death is simply the next descent, and perhaps the final integration.
What do you hope people remember you for?
not for founding a school of psychology, not for the theories or books, but for helping others listen to the voice within, to trust the symbols, to honor the soul. If I've done that, if I've helped even one person face their own darkness and not flinch, then I've lived well.
You once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes."
Yes, and I still believe it. In the end, the journey is inward, and the destination is wholeness.
Well, folks, we just had an honest, insightful conversation with the one and only Carl Jung about dreams, the shadow, love, loss, and everything in between. Did you enjoy this interview? Let us know in the comments, and tell us who you'd like to see next in the chair.